Welcome back. We're live on Fox 5's On the Hill this morning. The election-related lawsuits filed by the Trump campaign have so far remained unsuccessful. A federal judge in Pennsylvania last night throwing out a lawsuit saying that the plaintiffs have, quote, failed to meet their burden. Meanwhile, on Friday, President Trump invited GOP lawmakers from Michigan to the White House. Michigan leaders did ask the state to delay the certification for a, quote, full audit, but also didn't say that they think it would change the outcome. Joining us this morning to discuss this and other news issues of the week, Greg Rothschild, longtime Democrat and managing director of government affairs at the Glover Park Group, and Mark Pischea, former director of the Michigan Republican Party and former deputy director of the GOP Congressional Committee. Gentlemen, thanks for being with us. Mark, I want to start with you since you're our Michigan man. What is going on with Michigan when these leaders come all the way here to Washington, hear whatever they heard from the president in the Oval Office and then walk out and say, well, we only talked about COVID-19. Is there an effort here to overturn the will of the Michigan voters?
Well, I think we have to, take some of this at face value. The legislators delivered a letter to the president requesting additional COVID help for Michigan. And hopefully that will bear some fruit, because the reality is when it comes to the election is that these lawmakers are limited at this point as to how much they can do. It's really in a constitutional process at this point where the Board of Canvassers will make this decision. And it's not the job of the Board of State Canvassers to scrutinize what happens within counties. It's their job to certify the numbers that come from the counties in terms of the state total. So, their constitutional mandate is very clear. And if they defy that, which has happened in the past, there have been some instances where there have been some concerns, then the courts will have to intervene.
Greg, let me ask you about the situation we find us in, because there seems to be two alternate realities going on between what the White House is saying, claiming falsely that they won this election, and yet Democrats who are moving forward, though, not knowing whether or not they would have any chance of getting control of the Senate, dealing with a situation right now that they still do not have a stimulus package in place. Are we locked in place now that just nothing's going to get done on any of this until a new president is sworn in?
Tom, I'm going to take a counter position there and be optimistic. I think we've seen in past years that when both houses of Congress are in opposite hands, when there are narrow majorities, that is typically when we see compromise. We see typically one party governing and their bases driving policy when they have significant majorities. Neither party is going to have that in the House or the Senate. We're going to have divided government between the White House and the Congress. And I think that's when you can see, and I'm going to be an optimist and say that's when I hope we see compromise.
Mark, let me ask you about the Republican reaction to what's going on. Tomorrow will be 20 days since the election. Now, these states that were in question are starting to certify right now. Why haven't Republicans in leading positions spoken out more forcefully about some of these things that the president has been saying, some of the things that the president has been tweeting about our election process and how this election was held this year, especially in light of the firing of one of the top federal officials in charge of making sure the elections were safe from the get-go?
Right. Well, I think that most of these lawmakers are in a pickle. There's obviously the big political play, one that will determine how the next few years will look under a Biden administration, is control of the Senate. And so what's happening in Georgia is a paramount concern to the party. And the concern is that the president could be helpful or unhelpful in Georgia, depending on his disposition. But what I think, is going to happen here is that the longer the president keeps his heels dug in, the less helpful he's going to be, and the less credible he's going to be among independent voters that are going to matter incredibly much in the state of Georgia. So that's a big driving reason.
Well, he certainly hasn't been that helpful in the Georgia races right now, and that is very important to Republicans moving forward to be able to hold on to control of the Senate. Greg, let me ask you about this. The president ran over the summer, saying things about mail-in voting that were not helpful. Republicans didn't mail in vote. The president lost a lot of those elections. Are we seeing a repeat of this now because we don't have a White House that fully engaged in these Georgia Senate races?
That is exactly what Democrats are banking on. As you saw in this in November, when the Democratic Party fought hard to get their mail-in votes on time, that is what gave them the margin in the key states of Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Georgia, and Arizona, which are the 5 states he flipped. And because of President Trump really at odds with the Republican Party over the efficacy of mail-in voting, Republicans decided not to do it in key states across the country. And we are going to see that repeat again in Georgia in January. And when that happens, that hopefully will give Democrats their margin.
Let me end with you, Mark. As we move towards a certification of these votes, and then, of course, in December, the Electoral College casting its votes, when do you think that President Trump may begin to acknowledge the reality that the rest of the world seems to understand, is that Joe Biden is going to be the 46th president of the United States?
Well, there's two questions there, right? When does he concede and when does the transition happen from the White House? It wouldn't surprise me if this president never concedes.
Never.
But the transition has to happen, and I think there'll be an acknowledgement of that because, lawmakers, it's not just holding up the White House in that transition. You're holding up the transitions of 50, of every governor that was on the ballot, state legislatures, all of whom, rely on federal funding and need the government to make this transition so that they can complete theirs.
All right, we want to thank our political panel this morning, Mark Pischea and Greg Rothschild. We appreciate both of you for joining us on the Hill. We'll talk to you again soon.